Hi everyone, my name is Ashley Sabin, and this is a video that I put together as just one idea of a way that you could implement computational thinking into your language arts classroom. So the first question is, what is computational thinking? Well, computational thinking is a way of viewing problems as a computer scientist or a coder would. So you're looking at logical reasoning, algorithmic understanding, analytic structures, all sorts of things like that. Um, One pretty easy example to understand is if you think about a coder creating a program, think about the ways they have to consider different inputs and what those outputs will be when they're designing this program. Um, this kind of thinking can actually be applied to all kinds of learning in school, including the language arts, even though it might be a little less intuitive. But in this lesson plan, the goal is that students would employ computational thinking to create their own choose your own adventure story, and they would make considerations for each of those inputs and design the outputs. So not only would it foster computational thinking, but it also gives students that framework to express creativity and autonomy as a writer and a reader. So the standard that this lesson would fulfill is standard 7 through 8, writing standard 3. And it is to write narrative text to develop real or imagined experiences or events using effective technique, well-structured event sequences, descriptive details, and a logical resolution. And the objective here is that, as I mentioned, students will employ computational thinking as well as their own creativity to craft choose your own adventure stories to then be shared with their classmates. Um, and like I mentioned before, they'll consider the inputs and design the outputs. So let's talk about a few instructional strategies that you could use if you were planning to do this lesson in your own class. So the first one is storytelling, of course. You would first want students to be exposed to choose your own adventure stories. You might have students in your class who have no idea what that is. So one fun way to do it would just be to, sort of read a choose your own adventure story as a class, and then whenever there is a crossroads or a decision point, you could even maybe use an online poll to ask students to vote on which decision they want to make in the story. Um, and it would just be kind of a fun activity for students to collaboratively decide um, their own adventure. So some potential books that you could use to do something like this are To Be or Not to Be by Ryan North. It's a really funny choose your own adventure story that's based on Shakespearean stuff, primarily Hamlet. And then another one is Endlessly Ever After, which is inspired by classic fairy tales, and it's also really fun for students. Okay, another instructional strategy you could use here is project-based learning. So because students are, crafting their own story, it is in a sense a project that they could then, carry over to a real world context. So in this lesson plan, I thought that using the Twine software would be particularly applicable. So Twine is a online tool that it's sort of a generative AI in a sense, but it just allows you to design your own choose your own adventure stories. So it doesn't write the story for the students, but it allows them to format, okay, here's my story, here's where you make a choice and it branches out, and you can kind of continue to branch it out using their software. So once students had been introduced to choose your own adventure stories, they would use the Twine software to create their own. They could kind of follow their own creativity in doing this, and they would also naturally be thinking algorithmically. They'd be problem solving and, experimenting with different possibilities. And then the last instructional strategy that I would personally use in a lesson like this is small group sharing. I think students get a lot of validation from sharing their work and, getting that positive reinforcement. So once the students had completed their choose your own adventure stories, I would have them give them the chance to share them in small groups, and foster that sense of pride of their own creations and expose them to, other ways of doing it. Maybe their classmates had thought about it differently. So it's also a learning opportunity at the same time. So that is just a brief overview of one way that you could consider incorporating computational thinking into your English and language arts classroom. Thanks so much for watching.